What is going on, you bunch of fucking nerds? Thank you for joining me today on Bro Science Bullshit, where I'm trying to bring you the science behind the things that work and save you from having to deal with the bro science, the bullshit that really doesn't work. And today, I'm going to be talking about how we can use our central nervous system to speed up fat loss. So, this is kind of a crazy subject, right? So, let's kind of talk about what our central nervous system is. So, our central nervous system is the command center in our brain, right? It is our brain and our spine. This is the command center, the control panel that um, gives messages to the body and tells it what to do. So, your central nervous system is what's responsible for sending signals from the brain down the spine to the stomach for digestion. It is also the same signal that gets sent to a muscle to tell it to fire for movement, right? But it's also a signal that's sent to fat stores to tell your body how much fat to utilize in that moment to bolster the metabolism. So it's almost like it's like a Wi-Fi signal, right? So, and it's sending messages to these places, but we can't just think of this message as like a a a, uh, a single way this message comes out, almost like it doesn't come out with just one tone, right? So just like we can walk, or we can walk with like intent, where we're still walking, but we're walking very fast. Our stride is faster, it's more tense. Or we can walk a lot more lackadaisical, right? Very slow, very chill, um, and without a lot of effort put into it, right? Now that same theory, that we how we send a message to the muscle of how hard, how fast do we want that muscle to fire, we can send that same signal to fat stores, because we have neurons that go from our brain to our spine down into these adipocytes, these fat sites, to tell them how fast do we need to utilize fat in that moment. So the faster we can the faster we can turn on, create, the better of a CNS system, all these things, the better our central nervous system is, the more volume or the more gain we can actually turn up on that fat burning process. And we're going to talk about that here. All right. So, since we're talking about fat loss, let's take some time to talk about what fat is, and just do kind of a brief little runabout of what fat is, and how it works, and that good stuff, right? So fat, we have a couple different kinds of fat on the body. And I've said this before, I've put some of this information out before, but I'm going to put it out there on here again. And that is fat has been bastardized and given a really bad name, that we want to get rid of all fat is bad. In fat on the body, even though we don't like the way it looks, that we have fat that's actually very metabolically active, that can help us lose fat, as odd as that sounds. So we have three kinds of fat. We have a white fat, we have a beige fat, and we have a brown fat. So brown fat is the most metabolically active of all the fats. It's it's less preferential to use as a source of fuel. um, Beige fat. So beige fat was once white fat. They got turned into a more metabolically active brown fat. Again, it's going to be less preferential than white fat, and white fat is going to be the least metabolically active, and that is going to be the most preferential to utilize as a source of fuel. So, not all fat's bad. Don't don't let all fat have a bad fucking name, because it's very helpful to us, and especially as kids, as adolescents, brown fat is huge, and then it having it as we grow into adults is even more of a game changer for metabolic bolstering your metabolic system. So we have three different kinds of fats. What is fat here to do? What is it like? What does it help? What is it Does it help, right? And I talked about how brown fat and beige fat can help out with the metabolism, and being a little bit more metabolically active. But fat's also there. Like, we have subcutaneous fat, which is the fat we see. It's under the skin. It's stuff we don't like. And then we also have visceral fat, and that's the fat that gets stored um, around our organs. And visceral fat isn't always the best kind of fat to have on the body either. But those are two kinds of fat that we have. Um, and we have this for, we have it for protection, right? So protection of the organs around the gut area. We've also been told that fat is there to help us during times of famine, right? So when we don't have food around our body, this is a survival mechanism so that our body has something to kind of feed off of to keep us alive. But there's a third one, and this is one that a lot of people aren't talking about, is that your um, this is also utilized as a way to bolster your metabolism. So that furnace that we talk about, your metabolism, fat is utilized also to feed your metabolism, to speed your metabolism up. And that's what we want to kind of talk about today is surely we have it for protection. We also have fat for to help us out during times of famine, but it's also really big for bolstering our metabolism as a whole. All right. So now let's talk about how we lose fat, like the basics of kind of what the fuck that looks like um, inside the body, and then how the CNS system impacts that shit, and how we can kind of utilize that to bolster fat loss. So there's actually two steps when it comes to losing fat. So we have the mobilization process. So we have to get the fat out of the fat cell and into the bloodstream. So there's the mobilization process, which is first. And then after we mobilize that, then we have to get it into a cell, into the mitochondria, so that we can actually utilize that shit. Now, keep in mind, we can mobilize all the fat we want, but just because we're marching our little fucking soldiers down the street does not mean that they're actually going to war. They're just marching, right? And if we don't give them orders, then that fat will circle around throughout the bloodstream for a bit, and then it'll just be redeposited basically back where it came from. So we have mobilization, and then we actually have the oxidation. And for those of you guys that want to know, so you have the way fat is, I guess, set up in that fat cell is we actually have the fatty acid and it's attached to glycerol, and we have to break it. So if this was the fat, we can break that off so that fat can go into the bloodstream and be utilized. And just so you guys know, the way that that is broken off is with an enzyme called lipase inside the mitochondria. So for those of you who even give a fuck about that, that's how that happens. So we mobilize it with some lipase, we break that off, it gets sent into the bloodstream for use. Then it can be sent into a cell, hopefully. And we've talked about this, or I've talked about this in the past, about not just the mobilization process, but even once it's out there, like we have to get it into a cell, and it doesn't just go into a cell. Your cell needs to have enough receptors um, to even handle the amount of fat you're putting out there. So the more receptors your cell has on it, the more fat it can actually uptake and take into the cell to be utilized. So is more to it than it just like fat gets broken off and then fat goes into the fucking blood and then it's just inherently going to be used. Like it will be used, but the amount of which will be used is going to kind of be dictated here with receptors, but also with this CNS system. So this CNS system is huge because it is going to like think of it as like turning up the volume or the gain, I guess, for those of you guys who are musicians, on what's happening, because those neurons that go from the brain to the spinal cord right into that adipose site, if it's going just like this, right, and we're kind of mobilizing at this pace, then we turn up that volume or that gain with our central nervous system, and suddenly that pace has sped up just because we've got our central nervous system involved in this. So we can speed up the mobilization and the oxidation usage, the burning of fat, however the fuck you want to think about that. We can speed that up by instigating or initiating our central nervous system. And this is fucking huge. This is huge. And this is something that we're not talking a lot about. And this happens through a hormone that is then secreted. So we're going to send these electrical signals through all those neurons down to that fat cell. And this is going to happen with a hormone that most of us know or heard about, adrenaline or norepinephrine, because it's coming from the brain. So adrenaline, norepinephrine is going to be a huge player on your central nervous system and how much fat you can mobilize and then oxidize or burn up in any given moment, day, exercise session, however you want to think about that, right? All right, so central nervous system, um, epinephrine or norepinephrine, I say adrenaline. We need the central nervous system to be able to click on, and the higher rate we can click on the central nervous system, the more adrenaline, norepinephrine we can produce, the more norepinephrine, adrenaline we can produce, the more we can speed up this mobilization and oxidation process, right? But let's kind of take some of the basics, the foundations of this, and add those in here because those feed the CNS system. It's almost this uh, feedback loop that they kind of feed each other, right? So what I'm talking about here is your five pillars of fitness. I tend to think of six pillars of fitness, and these are your basic foundational things that are going to dictate how fast your body can even mobilize, how well, I should say, not fast, but how well, how proficient is it? And if we can get your body really proficient at it, then we speed it up. Fuck, you got a whole freight train going. It's gonna be hard to stop this. And this is where we start looking at people who are like, you have such a fast metabolism. You get so much done in the day. You have so much energy, right? Well, it's because they hit those pillars of fitness. So naturally, they have a really good ability to mobilize, a proficient ability, I guess I should say, to mobilize and oxidize fat. But because they have so much energy, they have their central nervous system is primed and it can go and it can be turned on and they can produce these hormones kind of at the flip of a switch. It gives them the ability to not only just utilize fat proficiently but then to do it really fast. So that's a huge thing. So let's kind of talk about like those standard six pillars, right? So we have food, calories in versus calories out, right? And food choices, so just food as a whole, which food is going to dictate how well our body runs and how good of shape our CNS system is in, right? If we're constantly under eating, we're constantly eating foods that are high in preservatives, don't have a lot of nutrient value, then the whole state of our body, just as we know as a whole, just isn't going to work very proficiently, right? Sleep. Sleep is a huge one. We know that sleep helps recover the body. It helps do a lot of things within the brain. So we know sleep is a huge factor here. Lifting and cardiovascular work, working out, doing cardiovascular, we know is a huge pillar on helping us, our body be more proficient at utilizing fat and keeping our body composition in check and all that good shit, right? NEAT, non-exercise activity thermodynamics, which is one of the most slept on uh, tools in everybody's toolbox, but it's just sheer regular fucking movement in the day. So like walking, talking, the way I'm animated with my hands, all of that is non-exercise activity. And the more of that I do, right, the more calories my body's going to ask for. So the more calories I'm going to output. But I guess just for food for thought, if I'm just kind of drab, talking like this, right? That's going to be a very different central nervous system. And it's going to be asking for a very different amount of fuel than if I'm talking like this and I'm really moving and I'm animated and everything I do is with very sharp movements. That's going to turn on my central nervous system a lot more. And it's going to ask for more fuel to fuel that stuff on a daily basis. I mean, think about it. If you had like when you see even kids, right? Kids that are very animated, they move a lot, they twitch, just they don't walk to their room, they run to their room, they run up the stairs. Everything they do in life is with like is emphatic and with emphasis. Their CNS system is turned on at a very high level every time they move, so their body's asking for a lot of fuel. And this is one of the reasons why very animated and very even kids that tend to have like, and this isn't, I shouldn't really put this out like this, like saying like kids that have ADD or ADHD tend to be in better shape. That's not, I can't necessarily say that's true, but kids that tend to move more and move more emphatically and are more emphatic with what they do in life tend to have lower body fat. Same with adults. Adults that they twitch a lot, they move with emphasis. They also tend to be the same way. And the adults that tend to be more, I guess, on the obese side tend to move with less emphasis and move less as a whole. So NEAT, non-exercise activity thermodynamics, and the way in which you do them with the CNS, which we're talking about, big deal, right? So the more we move in the day, the more fat we call to utilize. Sunlight. sunlight's massive. We know that we need sunlight for circadian rhythm. We know we need sunlight for vitamin D production, all that good stuff. And then the sixth one that I use is social. We've got to be around friends. Like we have to be around people. Um, we have to surround ourselves with people we love because it makes us feel good and it helps our brains recover. So we have to have these pillars and we have to have these down um, in a very general way, along with this CNS system that works very well. So we can be really proficient at utilizing fat. But if we don't have these pillars down, then our CNS system typically sucks. And if our CNS system sucks, then not only are we not proficient at utilizing fat as a source of fuel, but we're also not very fast at doing it either. And that fucking makes sense. Like that makes sense. So we should be proficient at doing it and then get fast at doing it, right? I mean, hell, even right now, here's a great example of it. I am just sitting here and talking on my little podcast here to you guys, and I'm not exercising. I'm not really doing anything. But the fact that what I'm doing is with a lot of emphasis, right? And I'm very interested and I'm very vocal and I'm moving a lot as I'm doing it. So right now my central nervous system is very kicked on at a very high level with just some of these small movements. And we can see that because you can see kind of in my glasses right here, they're fogging over because I'm also creating a high amount of thermogenesis. So I'm heating up my body quite a bit. My body's wanting to utilize fat as a source of fuel more so, or utilize fuel more so because of the activation of my central nervous system, even just sitting here. So having a very active central nervous system helps out when it comes to burning fat, when it comes to keeping your body composition where you want, improving your body composition, improving your health, um, even the amount of weight you can lift, right? So going for a really heavy lift in the moment, maybe it's a 1 rep or a 3 rep, getting your central nervous system involved, getting norepinephrine driven down from the brain through the spine and into the body is really going to facilitate more fat loss, more proficient fat loss, and just overall well-being. But I just want to give you guys that example that like you don't have to be doing anything crazy, right? Like my again, they're fogging up right here because of the movement. I do have movement here. It is a little bit warm, but I'm creating more warmth in my body, more of this thermogenesis and utilizing more fat just from the emphasis and the interaction between my brain and my body, getting my brain and my central nervous system turned on and tuned in more for what I'm doing. All right. So the real money question is like, how do I increase my CNS system? Right. Without just having to get pissed off and irritated. That's one way you could do it is just like walk around mad all the time and that would increase it. Or very worried and stressed out will do it too. But these aren't ways that we want to do it. And we actually see that happening or that happen in people who are leading high stress lives. Maybe not a high, not so much a high stress, like chronic life, like all the time, but maybe they hit this point in their life where things became very stressful, whether it be crazy stressful at work, at home, things like that. And that stress drives up their CNS system. They also tend to eat less, so they're not inputting near as much as they're outputting because of their atmosphere and circumstance and the way their life is kind of happening before their eyes, and it's kind of coming into their brain. It's really spiking that adrenaline, that norepinephrine spike. So their body is asking for a whole bunch of fuel, whether it be because of the thinking that's going on or the actual doing of what's happening in life, or the maybe a little bit of both during that traumatic time. But then also because, like I said, they're taking in less fuel. So we're outputting a bunch, we're not putting as much in. And we can see this version of that thermogenesis happen when people go through these kind of acute times of crisis. It could be a death in the family, it could be a breakup, it could be a million and one things, but we tend to see that sometimes in those situations. We also tend to see the other side of it where those traumatic times they can increase adipose tissue or increase fat on somebody, but that's kind of on the other end. Those tend to be people who during times of crisis they lean into food more. But really, I just kind of wanted to point out that there are times when we actually see this happen, and you've probably seen it happen with friends where they weren't exercising more, they weren't doing more, they're probably actually doing less in life as far as physically, but the emotional demand and that central nervous system demand was so high, on top of the fact they weren't eating near as many calories, that we see weight just literally fall off of their body. It almost looks like, on a weekly basis. So let's talk about how we turn on our CNS system without causing trauma in our lives and doing it in a shitty situation. So, number one, we have to get our brain to produce that norepinephrine. Now, keep in mind, your adrenaline can be produced in two places in humans. So, we can produce it in the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys, or we can produce it in the brain. We are specifically talking about your central nervous system. So we are specifically talking about adrenaline produced from the brain. So that's what we're talking about getting turned on more so, not your the adrenaline and your kidneys and things like that, which can just happen through respiration, things of that nature. So what can help turn these things on? Movement, right? So like working out can do this. Your atmosphere, the atmosphere that you create can definitely turn this on, right? A highly stressed atmosphere can turn this on. Now, this can be good stress, right? Where maybe it's a song in the atmosphere that you turn on, or maybe it is people around you that do it. And the people around you, that could be good or bad, right? They could be like, you're in the gym and you're around all your friends and you guys are getting a really good lifting session in, and everybody's kind of hitting PRs, or everything just feels good that day, right? And so that atmosphere, we're turning on our CNS in a very positive way. A very negative way of that atmosphere would be the way we talked about. If you're you're around a very toxic, in a toxic place, you're around toxic people, things of that nature, that can still turn it on, but in a very negative way. And the way your CNS system gets turned on is very important. If it's always in these negative ways, then this will have negative outcomes to it. So we want to make sure that when it comes to the atmosphere, that we're setting ourselves up to turn on this central nervous system in a positive way, right? So we can do this with like music, the music we listen to while we work out, the music we listen to while we go on a walk, the music we just listen to while we're driving, as a whole, right? This music can very much turn that atmosphere into a positive. It can energize you, and it can really turn on your brain and have it start speaking to the body. The things we watch, there's definitely things that we watch um, that they kind of motivate us. They can click on that adrenaline in the brain that kind of wakes you up, and you're like, ooh, you know what I mean? And so the things we watch can do this. The way you warm up before your workout can increase adrenaline and can increase norepinephrine in the brain. Um, like I said, what you think about, the things you think about can increase this. Um, and even the way you breathe, I kind of spoke about this earlier, but just tons of mouth respiration, short, shallow, fast breaths, fast breath, jeez, fucking wheeze, fast breaths can do this also. So there's many things that we can do to turn on this central nervous system. But remember, a lot of times people are turning on their central nervous system all the time because of these things I just talked about, right? Because of what they think about, the music they listen to, the way they breathe. But it's always turned on, right? They're always listening to some kind of music that gets them thinking, maybe just in a way that spurs their brain hardcore, right? It could be in negative ways. Um, the things they watch, the people they surround themselves with, all these things are turning on the adrenaline in their brain, but they're in very negative ways, in very fight or flight. Um, which I don't know. I shouldn't say fight or flight, because fight or flight's really just referring to like your sympathetic nervous system. But I'm more meaning this in a way that's like detriment. You can feel it's kind of detrimental to your health. You can feel that this is not a good feeling of adrenaline. This feels very anxious. This feels very uh, like something you can't let go of. It's not excitatory in a positive way. So when we constantly have it turned on because of those, then we can do more damage very quickly, especially when we're not taking enough food in to and getting enough sleep and getting enough sunlight and all those other basic pillars that I talked about, if we're not doing those things. So when we're turning on this CNS system, we have to make sure that we're also doing it in, kind of fundamentally positive ways. Now, one of the reasons why I really talk about doing it in positive ways is because I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but When this is brought on by negative factors, then we go to one end of the spectrum. Either that negative factor means that we're utilizing a whole ton of fat, right? Because we have our CNS system just pumped on, and this is where I fall into. So we have our CNS system is cranked up. We're just producing a whole bunch of adrenaline. We're asking for a lot of fatty stores, or a lot of fat to be mobilized and then oxidized because of the ruminating, because of the thinking, because of the movement that comes with me being stressed out. But because it's negative stress, I also lose my appetite. And so that means I'm outputting a lot while I'm not putting a lot of that nutrient um, back in, while I'm not getting a lot of good sleep, while I'm not getting a lot of good movement, which means, very acutely, or fucking short term, for a week or so, like, that's not bad. But if this is happening day after day, week after week, month after month, then that's when then shit goes awry, right? Like, we're constantly borrowing from the bank and using credit cards, and we're never paying back, or we're paying back maybe a minimum payment. We know that always ends up in a bad way. Or it's the other side of it, where we do it in a negative or unpositive way, and instead of not going for food, we're overeating food, right? We're overeating sugars and processed foods, and then we're not moving, we're not doing a lot of those things. And so then we're on that over consuming side, right? And the over consumption is just as stressful for the body as under consuming and asking for a lot. They're both just different sides of very stressful, inflammatory things that are happening, and ultimately means that long term um, damage can kind of happen from this. So we want to make sure that when we're turning on the CNS system, and I hate to like super harp on this, but we want to make sure that it's always, more often than not, it's not always, it can't always fucking be positive, but more often than not, it's coming from a positive place and not a negative place. Otherwise, we're gonna get all the negative connotations that come with it, right? All right, so let's like recap this so you guys have some tools to walk away from this. So if we want to burn fat, and we want to do it a little bit faster, right? Um, one of the first things we have to focus on are like these 6 pillars of fitness, right? We know that's the starting point. But if we really want to engage more um, of the ability to burn fat, then we know we have to engage this central nervous system. So how can we do this safely? So the first thing is we have to know that we can't have the central nervous system on all the time, every day. That kind of chronic usage of it is going to lead to negatory negative feedback loops. So we want to use things like getting good sleep, meditation, mindfulness, things like that, to make sure that we're not always stressed out and turning this on. But in times that we want to turn this on, when we're working out, maybe we're doing manual labor, when we're wanting to engage in more fat burning, what are the things that we can do? Well, one of them we know is exercise, right? And creating a solid atmosphere where you're exercising, right? So a place that is upbeat for you, a place that you like, a place that's comfortable, all that good stuff. Music can do it. Listening to certain songs can get you all jacked up on Mountain Dew chip, right? And turn on that central nervous system. We know that certain supplements like caffeine can help turn this on. Cold, getting introduced to cold, taking a cold bath can do this. And that's also one of the ways that I talked about earlier in this episode, that we have white fat that can convert to beige fat. And that's one of the ways that we can make fat more metabolically active, is by cold exposure. And then even breathing, Wim Hof breathing. So short, shallow breaths like that, constantly over and over again, can also turn on this central nervous system to help out. So, guys, I hope this helps out and makes some sense, and lets you in on some insight that a lot of people are talking about exercises and diets and macros, and all that's good, but we can really upregulate our ability to burn fat by not only doing that, but by also kicking on our central nervous system, producing adrenaline, and getting our body to mobilize and oxidize more body fat. Guys, I hope this helps out. Y'all motherfuckers, leave some comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button up there in the corner, because I'm going to be coming out with content more than weekly. Hopefully, I can do this. But guys, thank you so much for hanging out this long. Make sure you, like I said, you leave some comments. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'll let y'all later.